Okay, well, let's jump in. So we're going to be, Mara's coming in on Zoom. Let's see here. Hey, Mara. Oh, hey. How you doing?
Hi there. I wasn't sure if I texted you, but.
Oh, you did? Oh, I have everything turned off on my phone, so.
That's fine.
No noise. Okay, gotcha.
Well, Chris just texted me, so I just texted him to tell you to let me in. I'm
trying
to get rid of.
Okay.
Get rid of that big light behind me.
Whatever works for you, it works for me. So, all right, well, we're about to get started. So let's pray, and we'll jump into our study tonight. Lord, thank you again for this evening and for our time together, and we thank you as always, Lord, for your word. Pray that you would guide our study tonight, Lord, that you'd speak to us, that you show us the truth of your word and what it is that you would have us know, and pray that you would just give us food for thought, if nothing else, Lord, and ways to apply this to our lives. And so we love you and thank you. Praise things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so we are, let's share my screen here. We are in session 7 tonight of our study in Revelation. We are moving right along. I think there's 22 chapters in Revelation, and so we're going to be in chapter 12 tonight. We're probably only we're only going to get through chapter 12 of Revelation tonight, but we're also going to be looking at chapter 7 of the book of Daniel, because that's going to have some insights into what we're going to be studying tonight. From here, moving forward, hold on a second. Let me show you the recording. Is this recording? I can't tell.
Yes, it says it on the top of my screen.
Okay, great. As long as it is, I was to make sure I got that right. So moving forward for the next few chapters, the book of Revelation is going to focus a lot on the Antichrist and the final kingdom, basically, as we kind of refer to it, the final empire. And so also known as the beast. We're going to see this word a lot moving forward, the beast, the beast, the beast. And this is why we're going to take a look at Daniel 7, because it's a lot of parallels, and that'll give us some insight into this chapter as well. So starting Revelation 12:1. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. So just a quick recap. Last week, we spent a lot of time talking about the 2 prophets, the 2 witnesses that come. One thing I forgot to mention is that happens to be another parallel between the book of Revelation and the book of Joshua. So if you remember, prior to the Battle of Jericho, Joshua sends 2 spies basically to go into the land and spy it out. And somebody gets saved from that process. That's Rahab. And interestingly enough, they go in hiding for, sometime in Rahab's house, and then 3 days in the mountains, which again kind of parallels these 2 witnesses that die for 3.5 days and then they resurrect. So anyway, I'm just mentioning that because I forgot to mention it last time. But that's what we talked about last time, those 2 witnesses. Here we see a woman, and this woman is obviously somewhat metaphorical for somebody. So we get some details about her. She is clothed with the sun, the moon, and that are under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Now, this is very reminiscent of another scripture in the book of Genesis, Genesis 37. This is Joseph. You remember Joseph? He is a guy with the coat of many colors, and he had a few dreams. In verse 37, chapter 7, 30. So try it again. Chapter 37, verse 9. Then he, Joseph, dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. So, 11 stars plus Joseph makes 12. So sun, moon, and 12 stars. And when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in his mind. So Jacob, who is also known as Israel, okay, he gets his name changed to Israel. He and his 12 sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. He understands what this dream's all about, and he understands what Joseph is seeing here. It's a prophecy that eventually was going to happen. So this wasn't just like a random dream that Joseph has. later down the road, if you know the story of Joseph, he becomes basically the second in command of Egypt, which becomes the most powerful nation on the earth. And his brothers, they see him, they don't know it's him, they don't know it's their brother, and of course they bow to him, and he all that stuff goes on. So this was a prophecy of something that was going to happen in the future. So anyway, all this is just kind of point out that seems to be the parallel, that this woman is a representation of Israel. And I guess you could say, well, we'll talk about it a little bit. She's pregnant, she's crying out in birth pains, and we're going to see who she's going to give birth to, which will also give us some more insight into who she could be specifically. And we'll cover more of that shortly. But for now, we just know that this woman is she's Jewish in nature. Okay, that's the main point. Some people try to make this woman the church. I don't think so. I don't think it fits at all. If you subscribe to replacement theology, which I absolutely do not, replacement theology is the premise that when Israel rejected the Messiah, all of the prophecies and promises that were made to Israel pass on to the church instead. That there's nothing biblical about that idea. Okay, like nothing. There's nothing that would indicate that the promises of God that he made to Israel pass on to the church. Okay, nothing. It was mostly arose out of the Roman Catholic tradition. And as you can imagine, when Roman Catholicism was the state church, okay, it's basically governed by Rome. It's not a real popular message to be like, oh yeah, and Jesus is going to overthrow the government and, stomp on the rulers and he's going to take over. It's like, wait a minute, what? We're the rulers. We're Rome. You're not supposed to. So, they basically made it more, metaphorical. Oh, well, Jesus is going to reign in our hearts and instead of on the earth. And that became this whole, you have to jump through all these mental loopholes or what do you want to call it to make that work. But anyway, long story short, I don't believe in replacement theology at all. I think God he still has plans for Israel, and we're going to see those unfold in the rest of this book. So anyway, this brings us to another character, this red dragon. Who was the red dragon? What is this red dragon all about? So this is where we're going to pivot, and we're going to look at Daniel chapter 7. We're going to read the whole chapter because it's going to give us some insight into what we're going to be moving into the rest of this book. So Daniel chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. Then he wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. This phrase, the sum of the matter, it just means that he wrote down like the main point. So, some details that are left out of this vision that he gave us, but he gave us the parts that he felt were the most important and the parts that needed to be told. But it's not the whole thing. Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four beasts came out of the sea, different from one another. So these four winds, if you remember back in Revelation 7, we see a similar thing, which is in verse 1. After this, I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. So it seems to be a parallel here. In Daniel 7, they are blowing on this great sea, okay? And the sea, large bodies of water, usually it's like metaphorical for large groups of people. When you see prophecies about, they got caught up by, or they got overcome by a great flood or something like that, it's a lot of people is kind of the imagery here, okay? So these beasts we're going to see, these beasts are going to represent kings and kingdoms. And it seems like what's happening is these spiritual forces, whatever they are, these winds, which can also, the Hebrew word for wind is the same one as spirit, I believe. I could be wrong with that, but I believe that's true. But anyway, there's these spiritual forces that kind of affect humanity and bring up these kingdoms that eventually rule on the earth. Now, one thing we got to be clear about here, because this is going to get confusing otherwise. These beasts, when the Bible refers to them, it can refer to them as kings, so like leaders. It can refer to beasts as kingdoms, and it can also be referring to like the spiritual powers behind those things. And this is the thing, the Bible, God seems to kind of lump them all together. So, when it says the beast, he might be talking about any one of those things specifically or generally. And we're going to see that even just in this chapter of Daniel 7, it kind of talks about, these are kings. And then it says, well, this one's a kingdom. So you just got to have to kind of roll with that. That's kind of how God sees it and how he explains it. So it can get confusing otherwise if you don't realize that. So it's kings, like leaders, okay, kingdoms, or spiritual forces that are behind those kingdoms, okay. And that's a very biblical idea. If you read the book of Daniel elsewhere, you see that there's a prophecy that he gets where Gabriel comes to him. He's like, I've been wrestling with the king of Persia, and next I'm going to be going out to wrestle with the king of Greece. Now, obviously, the king of Greece is a person. An angel doesn't need to fight with them. So there's something else going on there, right? There's some sort of spiritual power that's going on behind those kingdoms. So anyway, there's other.
Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not obvious.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, sometimes. Well, I'm also saying, like, just you'll see in this chapter alone, you'll see that at times these beasts are explained as, oh, these are kings, and then another time says, well, this is a kingdom. What's that? Yeah, it can. I'm just saying it can be any. It can be any of them, right? So usually it does explain it, but it'll be confusing. Like, wait a minute, didn't they just say that these were kings? It's like, well, yeah, they are kings, kingdoms, and spiritual forces. Like, they're all kind of lumped together in the eyes of God. It's all one thing. There's pieces to them, but they're all the beast, essentially. You know what I mean? They can be individually referred to as the beast, or grouped together as the beast. So anyway, we're just. Maybe I explained that terribly, and maybe everybody's more confused now. But you'll see kind of as we move forward what I'm talking about, I think. So. Okay, so these beasts, let's talk about these. 7:4. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. So this beast is going to represent Babylon. So we probably should have, I don't think we've gone over this prophecy yet. We probably should have because it's important, but I'll give you the gist of it. So if you remember also in the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, he's the king of Babylon. He gets this crazy dream, and you might know the story. You know, he's basically like, hey, I need someone who can interpret it. We're not going to go into the whole story, but basically the dream is this. This statue, he sees the statue. Its head is of gold. Its shoulders are of silver. Its midsection's bronze. Its legs are iron, and his feet are iron mixed with clay, okay? And then all of a sudden a rock comes from the heaven, strikes the feet. The whole statue crumbles, and the rock becomes a mountain. And, basically the idea is it's a prophecy of what we might refer to as the age of the Gentiles, okay? Or the age of Gentile rule, essentially. So Nebuchadnezzar, he was the king who conquered Judah, okay? And led them into exile. And it was at that point that Israel never really quite got, like they were always under control of some other nation from that point forward, okay? All the way to the diaspora where they were spread out, and that's in the Roman Empire. Anyway, so the gold represents Nebuchadnezzar, represents Babylon, okay? So that's the first kingdom, which is followed next by the Medo-Persian Empire, we'll talk about, followed by the Greek Empire, followed by the Roman Empire. Now, that last one in the statue prophecy, it's iron, and then iron mixed with clay. And as we're going to see here, that's like, to us, we'd see that as 5 different like layers essentially. But we're going to see here that it describes them as 4. There's 4 beasts, okay? So this is a parallel prophecy to the one that Nebuchadnezzar had. And what's interesting is that this is why a lot of prophecy buffs, teachers, scholars, we call them, they'll call that, the iron, an iron mixed with clay, Rome, and Rome like 2.0, essentially. It's kind of like the same kingdom. But anyway, we'll kind of dive into this more as we move into this prophecy as well, because it's a parallel. So there's some interesting things that we can note about this this lion that had eagle's wings. A lot of similarities to Nebuchadnezzar. So if you also have read Daniel, there's a chapter where Nebuchadnezzar actually writes a chapter of the Bible. He writes this in the book of Daniel, a letter of what happened to him, where he basically became prideful. God judged him, and for 7 years he went insane. And it says he ate grass like an ox. He lost his mind, and then finally after 7 years comes back. And that seems to be very kind of parallel to what's going on here. It's an animal that's made to stand like a man, and the mind of a man was given to it. So there seem to be some real parallels there. I'll tell you what's interesting is Nebuchadnezzar, like his confession of the Lord. Like, I'll be surprised if we don't see him someday in heaven. Like, I think he ended up coming to know the Lord, but We'll
Come here. Hey.
Verse 5, and behold, another beast, a second one, like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, arise, devour much flesh. So this beast represents the Medo-Persian Empire. And what's interesting, it says it's raised up on one side. The Medes and the Persians were 2 separate people groups who formed an alliance and, basically formed an empire. It was led originally by Cyrus the Great, who conquered Babylon, and he was himself a Mede, and he was also Persian. He was half Mede and half Persian. And that's one of the reasons why he was an effective leader and how he was effective in uniting these 2 people groups. Today, we know the Medes as the Kurds and the Persians as the Iranians, okay? So they still are in existence today, just by different names. Now, what's interesting is that it notes that this one side is bigger than the other one, essentially. And that was true. The Persian Empire did end up eclipsing the Medo side of it. And that's why, a lot of people just refer to it as the Persian Empire now, because, the Medes kind of, waned in power as time went on. But it was the empire that succeeded Babylon, and it was, in fact, the most powerful empire of its time until verse 6. After this, I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So this beast represents the Greek Empire. And we see some interesting details about this beast as well. It has 4 wings and 4 heads. One of the amazing things about Alexander the Great, who was the leader of the Greek Empire, who, basically helped grow it to prominence. There's other prophecies as well by Daniel about specifically the Greek Empire and Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, he conquered the entire Persian Empire in a matter of like 11 years. So Persia was the most dominant empire in the entire world, and he just like trounced on it like it was nothing. Like they couldn't do anything to stop him. At the end of his conquest, he actually got depressed because there's nothing left to conquer. And he literally drunk himself stupid and to death, essentially. And since he had no heir to the throne, they asked him when he was on his deathbed, who do we give the empire to? And he just said, give it to the strong. And so what ended up happening was his 4 strongest generals ended up taking their parts of the empire. And so they split into 4 different sections, the Greek Empire, okay? None of them were quite as strong as, the whole unified thing that Alexander the Great had, but nonetheless, that's kind of how it went forward. And this is why we see there's 4 heads here. So again, kind of mimicking that. If you do a full study on the book of Daniel, you'll see there's a lot more details that he gets about the Greek Empire, but whatever, we're not gonna get too deep into that one tonight. Verse 7, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth, devoured and broke in pieces, and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So 10 horns. If you remember, we just talked about in Revelation 3, or 12:3, I should say. There's 10 horns. This is kind of what we're talking about this chapter. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So we see some similarities. So remember that statue prophecy we're talking about, the 4th kingdom, Rome, iron is the metal that represents it. And we see this beast here has great teeth of iron. So we see a parallel there. It says it's different from the other ones. We'll talk a little bit about what that might mean. But certainly like the other, right off the bat, the other animals we've seen, one's a lion, one's a bear, one's a leopard. They're all pretty similar. It's to some degree. Obviously, they're different animals, but they're all furry. They all have teeth, claws, walk on 4 legs. You know what I mean? A dragon would certainly be something that's a lot different. He doesn't exactly see what kind of beast this is. But if he's seeing a dragon with 10 horns, that would make a lot of sense. That would be a striking parallel between what he's seeing and what John sees in Revelation 12 as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, what makes it so different. But so we also get this glimpse at what we refer to as the Antichrist, this coming world leader. When it talks about horns, that's usually what it's referring to. That's usually a reference to the specific leaders or kings, okay? And this is why they're oftentimes, they're part of the beast, and so they are the beast, and that's part of why there's some overlap in terms of how the Bible refers to them. But it talks about this one, and it says that he has eyes like a man and mouth speaking great things. It seems to be one of the characteristics of the Antichrist. He's got a big mouth, and he's extremely boastful. So we'll see more about that very shortly. So verse 9, as I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were open. So all of this stuff very much reminiscent of what we've been reading in Revelation with the throne room of God, all that stuff. The Ancient of Days seems to be a reference to the Father. We'll see why that is, because we're going to see Jesus, the next coming verses say one like the Son of Man, gets dominion and all that stuff. So, we'll iron that more as we get into it. But one of the weird things too, it talks about this wheels of burning fire, or its wheels were burning fire. Like a throne with wheels is a little strange to think about. Is it a wheelchair? Like what? If you read in the book of Ezekiel 10, he gets a couple different revelations into the throne room of God. And is this getting warm, by the way? Is this like, no? Yeah? You guys okay? Okay, if you guys are good. What's that? Okay, all right. I'll make sure not too warm or anything though. Sorry. In Ezekiel 10, he sees these cherubim, and there's a very weird phrase where it says he sees that there's wheels inside of wheels that kind of follow these cherubim around. And frankly, I'm not sure what to make of it exactly. I don't know if it's like a spiritual thing that he's seeing or something that's like hyperdimensional. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to say, but there's a parallel there between what Daniel sees and what Ezekiel sees. Yeah, we'll find out maybe someday when we get there what those are. They seem to be connected to these spiritual entities. So I don't know what they are. Just throwing that out there. If you have any ideas, you can tell me. There's some speculation, but yeah, we're not gonna speculate too much. Anyway, everything here kind of I'm struggling tonight. Everything here pretty much mirrors the account that John sees when he's in the book of Revelation. So I looked then because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. And as I looked, the beast was killed and his body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So this world empire and its leader are destroyed. Actually, we'll see in Revelation, after the Battle of Armageddon, if you can call it a battle, more like a slaughter, the Antichrist is picked up and thrown directly into Gehenna, which is what we think of as hell, the final hell. And he's the first one to go there, and just no time wasted, boom, goes right in. So seems to be kind of what's going on here. And again, it's almost like Daniel looks this way and then he looks back and it's just like, whoa, the beast is destroyed, gone. So happens kind of quickly from his point of view. Interestingly enough, these other beasts are allowed to continue on. So there's going to be a millennial, what we call the millennial reign, 1,000-year period. Jesus is going to reign on the earth, and the earth's going to be populated with people. And so it seems like these beasts, Babylon is actually a city today. It's in modern day Iraq. Interestingly enough, Saddam Hussein fancied himself like something like the reincarnation of Nebuchadnezzar. He actually spent a lot of effort and time and money rebuilding Babylon, particularly the temple and the palace and all that stuff. And there's all these different sites that have been rebuilt by Saddam Hussein, which is kind of strange to think about. Well, Saddam's gone, obviously, but Babylon, it's back and it's there and it's in Iraq. So, like I said, the Persians are modern day Iran, and obviously Greece, we know where that is pretty much. So that's actually the same name. Yes.
The 1,000 years, is that a peaceful period, or is that like the tribulation time?
No, it's peaceful. No, it's peaceful period. So this is when Jesus is actually reigning. This is where you see passages where it'll say things like the lion will lay down with the lamb, babies will play with ass. Like that's the level of peace that we're talking about. Like it's not just peace between nations, it's peace between nature and mankind as well. Now, what's ironic is that at the end, so for that 1,000-year period, Satan is bound. It says he's bound in the, I believe, the bottomless pit, the busos we talked about last time. And after 1,000 years, he's let loose again. And once he's let loose, mankind rebels against God again, which is like insane. But it's almost like all of history is God like proving a point that, you know what, mankind, kind of evil, you know what I mean? Like kind of wicked, kind of rebellious. And it doesn't matter what you do, like even if you have the perfect rulers, like, you know, if you look at just the age of mankind, right? In history, you have a period where it's like, okay, it's almost like anarchy. Like everybody's just running around doing their thing. And, you know, kind of, we see pop-ups of, you know, governments kind of forming, but then God picks a nation, Israel, and he gives them the law. Okay, so now they have a moral law that's given to all of mankind. And so they have that for a while. And well, that doesn't go so well either because Israel, you know, dives into wickedness and they fall apart. So then this is where we get this age of Gentile governments, okay? And everybody seems to try a different idea. So what's interesting is about, especially if you look at the statue prophecy, as it goes down the line, each of those kingdoms get militarily stronger, but politically weaker. So Nebuchadnezzar was an absolute monarch. Like anything he said goes, okay? No questions asked, period. So he had absolute, well, he wasn't like the most powerful king ever because, you know, his army wasn't as powerful and his military presence wasn't as powerful. His reign over everything was, it was absolute, okay? Now, after he comes along and the next empire comes, they decide, you know what, maybe giving all the power to one guy isn't such a great idea. So they start making laws. And this is one of the instances, if you read the book of Esther, Xerxes runs into that problem where he makes a decree, but he's also held accountable by other governing bodies to kind of hold up to that decree. So he didn't have absolute power. And then as time goes on, it gets even more and more. They, you know, just there's always this one ruler, but their power gets weakened over time. Okay, and that seems to be the case in all of these. So it's like every single one of these governments is like an experiment. Like they always go wrong. They always go bad at some point. And it's like, well, that one didn't go bad. Let's try a different form of government. And this final one's going to be the last attempt that God allows. And then he comes and stops it. All right, now we're going to have perfect governance. I didn't mean to get into this tonight, but we're here. So,
Can I ask a question?
yeah, go ahead.
Do you think, is that going to be like one world governance?
I will say this. I don't think it's going to encompass the entire world because we're going to see that the kings of the East come to make war against the beast, the Antichrist and his kingdom. Okay, so that's usually, most people refer to that, you know, think that there's China, North Korea, maybe some other nations over there. We don't, you know, at least China, I would say. So no, they don't encompass the entire world, but the big bulk of it. And you know, the known world to them at the time that this kind of stuff is being written, what they would consider the whole world. Yeah, so coming back to this idea of government, like one of the things we got to realize is that there's only one perfect, well, first of all, the perfect society is the society that needs no governments, okay? That is the ideal. So when people say, what's the best form of government? Well, really, you're asking the wrong question. It's best if we don't have any need for government at all, okay? Well, okay, the problem is that people are evil and people do terrible things and they hurt each other and they, you know, destroy each other's property and take it and it goes bad. So you have to have some government. And every system of government fails or succeeds depending on certain, you know, variables, basically. There's only one perfect form of government, and that is absolute monarchy with a righteous king. Now, the problem is we can't seem to dig up one of those, okay? There is no righteous king, but that's the point of Jesus, right? He's going to set up the perfect government over still governing sinful people, okay? And so up until that point, it's sinful man trying to govern sinful man, and they all fall apart, every single one. And you've done any study of history, you know, some fail a lot faster than others and fail a lot harder than others. You know what I mean? Like that's for sure as well. And we could probably spend all night just talking about that. Go ahead.
One thing that comes to mind, and I don't even know if this is true, but Iran before if they want to use nuclear.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have to check with the Ayatollah religiously.
Well,
So
yeah.
there's like two governments.
Yeah, there's like there's in Iran there's political leadership and there's spiritual leadership, and there's some overlap there, I would say. It's no
Have you heard
secret.
that though? Is that true? If they want to use nuclear, they gotta check with this Ayatollah.
I don't know about. Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that the Ayatollah has a lot of influence over there to the point where he practically is a political figure, I believe, not simply a religious one. See, I was thinking about Islam. Islam doesn't really make a big distinction between political leadership and religious leadership. There's a lot of overlap there. So yeah, the Ayatollah is not a particularly friendly guy.
Military.
What's that?
I'm just thinking militarily with the nuclear versus religious.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've heard some, some disturbing things about what they believe. So weirdly enough, the Muslims have an end times prophecy. They have eschatology on that as well in terms of what they believe are going to happen in the end times. They believe that once the world has like basically devolved into chaos, that Jesus is actually going to come back. So Jesus was a prophet to them, and he's going to kill all the Jews and the Christians. And then weirdly enough, though, that very much aligns in what we're going to be seeing here in Revelation, right? This, of course, it's not Jesus; it's the Antichrist who does this. But there's a lot of overlap there, which is kind of a little, it's a little like, okay, well, that's weird. I'm sure, you have to imagine that Satan was probably borrowing from the Bible when he, made some of those prophecies. But yeah, so my understanding is the Ayatollahs are kind of trying to hasten the day when the Messiah will come. And so if they can drive the world into chaos, they can achieve that. And that's one of their aims, which obviously is not great, anyway. Yeah, we could talk all night too about that subject and the conflicts in the Middle East. What's weird is that so most of the Middle East hates Israel, but the Middle East also hates each other almost as much as they hate Israel. So Saudi Arabia and Iran are not friends, like not at all. And they're both kind of scared of each other, particularly Saudi Arabia. They've been afraid of Iran for a long time. This is one of the reasons why, when the United States gets involved, it's messy, and sometimes it's our interest, sometimes it's the interests of Saudi Arabia that we act in there. So anyway, that's a whole other topic of discussion entirely, which maybe we'll get to later, but we're going to keep moving because I got limited time. Okay, so anyway, so this Antichrist is taken down, this final beast is taken down, and the other ones continue on. Okay, 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, okay? And he came to the Ancient of Days. So this one like a son of man is different from the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So again, thinking about the prophecy of the statue, that rock, it says it's cut without hands. It's it's one of the phrases that Daniel uses about it. Becomes a great mountain that encompasses the whole earth. That's what's being referred to here. That Jesus is going to be given the kingdom by the Father, and he's going to have dominion. So that is a promise, and that's going to happen. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These four beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth. So again, as I said, these can be referred to as the specific leaders or as the kingdoms themselves. So here it's referring to them as kings. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. We're gonna keep moving. Then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up and before which 3 of them fell. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things and that seemed greater than its companion. So we see again here how it talks about how this beast is different from all the other ones. And one of the things we have to kind of note is that, like, think about our modern era and think about think about Babylon, think about Persia, think about Greece, even think about like early Rome, okay? Those empires spanned a couple thousand years, something like that, okay? Like a long period of time. And while there were some advancements made over those time, they're all pretty similar. Like none of them were like significantly different. They're all fighting with swords and axes and shields, and they're making things out of rock still, buildings. Like you look at our civilization today, like there's no comparison. You know what I mean? Like at no point was anybody worried that any of these empires were going to destroy the entire earth. You know what I mean? Today that's a problem. Like we have enough nuclear arsenals to literally vaporize every square inch of the earth. Okay, that's a real thing. Like we're talking significant differences between like this final kingdom and these other ones before, and that I think is one of the reasons why he notices that it's so much different. Because like everything, like what is the same? Like none of us farm for our food. We go and buy it somewhere. None of us walk to get around anywhere. We drive or take trains or whatever. We fly in the air in craft. Like all this stuff is so foreign to what was going on. And like I said, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, even the early Roman Empire, like they weren't all that much different. There's differences, obviously, but more similarities, I would say. So I think this is part of the reason why this last beast is notably different, because like the times we live in are notably different. Even just 150 years ago. I mean, man, you think about how far technology and how fast technology has progressed. It's mind-boggling. But anyway, that's just point of note. So this leader, again, we see that he has eyes and a mouth. Okay, cool. And he's got a big mouth. That's one of the things he keeps saying. He keeps saying a lot of haughty words, let's say. And he asks about these other three horns that basically are taken out. It's going to be explained. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. The time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces. As for the 10 horns, and of this kingdom, 10 kings shall arise. Out of this kingdom, 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones and shall put down 3 kings. So this word for put down, it can mean make low or humble. So, if you guys have ever seen or read the Left Behind series, they made a couple of movies out of it, and they like a series of books that are all about end times prophecy, and they kind of put a story to it. They translate this as the coming leader basically killing 3 of these other leaders. I think it's a scene. I saw the movie once. It was a long time ago. I think the leader's name is Nikolai Carpathia in those books. And there's a scene where like he basically murders 3 of these guys, and like this big, I don't know, I forget exactly what's going on, how they explained it, but it's possible that he kills these 3 guys. It's also possible that maybe they get like demoted or thrown out of leadership or something like that. I mean, we don't know exactly for sure what's being said here. It does say that, humbled, put down, brought low, something along those lines. But he does it to 3 of these 10 kings. So evidently this kingdom is broken up, as it seems, into 10 different sections. And that kind of goes align again with the idea that it's iron mixed with clay. It talks about how the pieces don't hold together. So it seems like this final iteration of the Roman Empire is going to be similar to something like the European Union or, like the United States. It's a lot of separate states, or countries that are unified through some agreement. So while they're technically separate, they're together as well. And so, what this looks like exactly when, I think it's to be seen. I personally think that we're going to see a mega empire between Europe, between North America, South America. I think they're all going to form together. Because if you think about it, Rome started in, obviously, Rome, Italy, but the Roman Empire spanned all the way from Britain all the way to our modern day Iran, basically. Okay, and that was all considered the Roman Empire. If you were in that, you were Roman in a certain sense. Now, and yeah, even like Paul, for example, he was Jewish, but he had Roman citizenship. There was ways you could go about getting it, even though you weren't from, you weren't ethnically Italian or Roman. What's interesting is that, what happens with Rome is I think it's around 500 AD. I could be wrong exactly, but the empire was getting too big, it was getting too bloated, they couldn't control it all, and it was constantly being attacked by barbarians. And so what they decided to do was they decided to have a consolidation, actually very similar to the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union crumbled, they basically were just like, all right, we're just going to let go of all these nation states that we can't really control or support anymore. We're just going to bring everything back to Russia. Rome did a kind of similar thing. They let all of Western Europe, basically just like, all right, you guys are on your own. And they formed what was called the Byzantium Empire. They moved the capital from Rome to Constantinople, which is in modern day Istanbul in Turkey. And that's how it was. It was like they both considered themselves the Roman Empire, essentially. But one was called the Byzantine Empire, and the other one we would call let's just say the Holy Roman Empire. Okay. It's France, it's Germany, it's Spain, it's Britain. And for a long time, they all had the same kind of Roman Catholic religion, and we're all unified by the Pope. And if you've ever done any history on the medieval empires and what was going on there, it was like a constant struggle. They were constantly fighting each other, sort of, but at the same time, they were unified by this religion. It's weird. It's a weird period of time. But ever since, so eventually the Ottoman Empire conquers the Byzantine Empire, but the other leg of the Roman Empire kept going. And now every country kind of had its day. France had its day, Spain had its day, Germany, Britain, they all kind of had a chance to rule, and be the dominant country at the time. And today, obviously, that has moved further west to the United States. And who colonized the United States? Well, Britain and, Spain, all these European nations basically colonized, North and South America. So, in a certain sense, you kind of think of what we have going on right now as almost this extension of the Roman Empire. Even Hitler, and that's what we referred to as the Third Reich. It was like the third, iteration of the Roman Empire as he saw it. And so that was his plan. So anyway, so this idea, same groups of people. So I think what we're going to see is a unification of all of it eventually. My hope is that it's the rapture that kind of leads to it, because if millions of people suddenly just went missing, that would freak people out. They would, the people who want power would very quickly consolidate. They'd be able to do it. People are freaked out. They want answers. They want something. Hey, we're going to unify everything and come together. And, then you'd have the military power of the United States crossed with the population presence of Europe. And it would be like a mega empire, essentially. So anyway, we'll see if that happens or not. Yeah, go ahead.
So the feet of this statue,
yes,
iron and clay,
mm-hmm.
To me sounds like it's wheat. It symbolizes the wheat.
Right.
So whatever's going to become,
yeah, I
would imagine, is a wheat gathering.
Well, I think that it's going to be militarily strong but politically weak. That's the trend as you go down the statue. Like you were saying, they become militarily stronger but politically, from the governance, from the single ruler's perspective, they have less overall power. You know what I mean? Does that kind of make sense? So that's one of the things they kind of did as the kings went down. The kings got less and less power. They're still super powerful, still the most powerful people in the world, but they had less control over their governments and their countries as time goes on, even though their military power got stronger and stronger as the time goes on. So
did you say this meteor comes and takes out the feet of this statue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a rock. This is a rock that was cut without hands, falls from heaven, strikes the feet of the statue. The whole statue crumbles, and then the rock becomes a mountain. We are gonna dive into that prophecy a little bit later. Maybe we should have done that first, but whatever. here we are.
I'm just thinking this, whatever symbolizes defeat is going to be taken out
Mm-hmm.
because it's a weakness, and the rest is going to.
Yeah, well, Jesus is going to be the one. That's the thing. The rock that's cut without hands, that's a representation of Jesus. Jesus himself said, I am the rock, you know. That's how he's referred to. So the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. It's a reference to Jesus. And so same idea here. He's going to be the cornerstone that strikes the feet, and then, you know, his dominion takes over the whole world. That's the idea. So we are going to cover that prophecy in more detail later, because there are some things in that chapter that I really want to pull out that are going to come, but we'll talk about that more as we get into more of the details of this final world kingdom. Okay, where do we? I don't think we didn't do 25, right? Okay, yeah. So 25. He shall speak words against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints. This is talking about this, you know, the Antichrist. He shall speak words against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Now that sounds weird to us in English, but in the Hebrew, it's basically a year, 2 years, and half a year. Add it all together, it's 3.5 years. It's a great tribulation. Okay, that's what we've been talking about this whole time. This 3.5 year period, it keeps coming up over and over and over again. So again, he's gonna be a big talker. He's a political figure. This word says going to wear out the saints. It can also mean wear away or harass constantly. Same kind of flavor there, the text. And it's so interesting too. It says he shall think to change the times and the law. He's also called the man of lawlessness in a number of other places. So one of the interesting things, I'm going to call it interesting, but one of the things about the world we live in today, one of the most predominant philosophy that seems to be motivating most of the things around us is the philosophy of postmodernism. Okay, now postmodernism basically boils down to this. Okay, there's an infinite way of interpreting a thing, and none of them are actually correct. That's basically what postmodernism boils down to. And it relies on the idea, for it to really work, it relies on the idea that there is no God. Okay. Now, obviously, there is a God, so that's what kind of throws it totally out the. I mean, there's a lot of other things that throw it out the window. For one, it usually doesn't make sense logically, so there's that. But basically, the idea, like, this is where people get the idea of, like, oh, I have my truth, you have your truth. You know, there's no right or wrong. There's no real. Truth has no meaning, essentially, in postmodernism, is what it boils down to, okay? And so that's very useful for people who are in power, because if there's a saying, people who don't believe, what is it? People who believe in nothing will believe anything, something like that. If you can get people to not have an objective morality, you can get them to do anything you want as long as you motivate them correctly, okay? And this is why political leaders love this idea of people not actually, like, this is oftentimes why they hate religion so much, because, you know, we have the Bible, we know what's right and wrong, and we can look at it and say, like, listen, no, this is right, this is wrong, this is the proof, there you go. But with everything else, it's very wishy-washy, and it's mostly about getting people to feel, you know what I mean? Like, oh, getting them to feel like this is okay. And this is why we see all this stuff around us, especially when it comes to, like, transgenderism. Like, none of it makes any sense. Like, you know, they'll say, like, oh, there's you know, there's not just two genders, there's like an infinite amount of genders. Okay, well, hold on a second. It's like, well, do men and women exist in any way that's meaningful? There's like, yeah, okay, well, how do we determine whether men or, you know, women meaningfully exist? That's where they really start to struggle, because, well, apparently it's not biology. You can't tell, you know, by their chromosomes or their body parts whether they're male and female. It's how they feel. Well, what does it mean to feel like a man or a woman? And how would I know? Like, I feel like me. How do I know that feels like a man or a woman? Like, I'm just making this up as we go. And that's the thing. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. But it feels good. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what we see going on today. And I think that that's kind of what's going on here as well. This guy, he's more or less setting the agenda and determining for everybody else what's right and wrong. And he's the one who's going to be, setting the morality essentially. And yeah, what we see today is bonkers. Like, yeah, go ahead.
I gotta tell you what I read.
Okay.
Hasbro is taking away Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head.
Mm-hmm.
It's just Potato Head. No more Mr. and Mrs. I told my dad the end is here.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like, it's so weird because it's like it's bonkers. Like that's where we are today though. It's all about feelings. It's not about like, it's a Jack Sparrow philosophy is how I would refer to it. If you guys remember Pirates of the Caribbean, there's this one scene where, Will's getting all either on that ship together. It's just him and Jack, and he's getting all mad at him. He's like, "My father was not a pirate." And then Jack just like, takes the sail and like, and they have this little conversation. And he's basically like, "Listen, I can let you drown, but I can't get this boat back to the harbor by myself." Okay. And basically what he's saying is like, the only thing that matter are what a person can do and what a person can't do. Like, there is no right or wrong. It's like, whether I kill you or not makes no difference whatsoever morally, because morality doesn't really mean anything. Weirdly enough, though, like, it's weird I like that movie, but when you really examine what it's trying to argue, it also doesn't make any sense, because even him, like, the moral of the story is that, like, well, Jack's a pirate, but he has his own set of codes that he lives by, which is like the pirate's code. And so as long as you're living by some code, that's what matters. And it's like, what? Where are you getting that from? Anyway, none of it makes sense. But that's the world we live in today, okay? But again, because what's that? Yeah, right. That's part of the imagery. He has his own moral compass. It doesn't point to the same north that everybody else has. It points to whatever he wants. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of imagery in that. And of course, like, sure, it makes for a nice movie, I suppose. In real life, does it work? No, not at all. But again, very useful for people in power, because it's not about, again, it's like, it's not about right or wrong to them. It's what can I get people to do? What can I get people to believe? What can I get people to act on or to not act on, as a matter of fact? They want both. They want to make sure that they have enough people doing what they want and enough people not opposing them. As long as they can work that out, and do the math, that's all you need. So it may sound very cynical, but it's just, listen, this is how it is, people. So anyway, I'm obviously not very hopeful of our political situation currently. But anyway, all that to say, this guy seems to be, same sort of idea, setting his own moral and political agenda. So, all right, we got to keep going, because it's 8:05. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. So Daniel sees all this stuff, and it has a happy ending where Jesus, comes, he sets up the kingdom, and he gives the kingdom, he gives the kingdom to the people, which is, that's what we want. But Daniel is visibly disturbed by all of this. It says to the point where his face changes colors and stuff. He probably felt sick to his stomach by seeing all of this. But anyway, that's that. I was telling this to the kids last night. Like, sometimes I ask God, like, Lord, I want to see like visions and prophecies and things like that. And then you just see stuff like this and like, oh wait, Jesus, God's just like, you can't handle the truth. I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right. It probably would disturb me to no end, and I probably wouldn't be able to handle it. So maybe it's for the best. But I still want to see it anyway. I don't care. There's a part of me that's curious, I suppose, and whatever. God knows best. So, all right, back to Revelation. So as we said too, like the book, the timeline, the narrative, it kind of jumps back and forth. Okay, and this is where we're going to see a jump backwards here. So, verse 4. So again, this is talking about the red dragon. Okay, this beast with 10 horns. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. So, okay, wait, what? Who is this guy? So this is talking about Satan, basically, okay? And this here, we're seeing basically where he fell from heaven. And interestingly enough, this is a third of the stars. Angels are referred to as stars. So what it seems to indicate is that not only when Satan rebelled against God and he was, cast out of heaven, essentially, a third of the angels went with him as well. So the good news is that the odds are in our favor. There's a 2-to-1 odds where we have good angels versus bad angels. And then we have God as well. So that helps, of course. Yeah, so this is going way back, and we'll talk about this, when does this sort of happen? We'll talk about that soon. But he plans on killing this child that's going to be given, birth to by the woman. So this is obviously, it seems obvious to me that this is a reference to Jesus, that it was, Jesus was Jewish. He was from Israel. Okay, he's a Jewish king, and ethnically and every other way as well. So if you remember also in the Gospels, when the Magoi, people say called him Magi, but really it's Magoi. Well, that's another topic for another day. Or the wise men, as we sometimes call them. They are coming to find the Messiah, and they come across Herod. And Herod is, he finds out that these guys are looking for a king, and he's the king that was set up by Rome. And he gets obviously a little insecure about it. You know the story. He says, hey, when you find him, let me know so I can worship him too. But really, he wanted to kill him. And obviously, the wise men, they end up, in a dream that, God tips them off, and they sneak out. And then Herod has a temper tantrum, kills like every child under a certain age, or every male child under a certain age. And you know that story. So Satan had a plan on eliminating Jesus before he could accomplish his mission, but it even goes further back than that. So if you look at over and over again throughout history, Satan has plans to ruin. That's Satan's only hope, is to ruin the plans of God, and ruin the prophecies of God. There's all these instances where, for example, the story of Joash, his aunt, I believe, was Athaliah. She attempted to eliminate every member of the royal house of David. And as you know, Jesus had to be an heir, or I should say, heir to the throne of David. And so that was like Satan's attempt to thwart that plan. Now, of course, one makes it through, Joash. And so throughout history, we see all these attempts by Satan to try to throw off the plans of God and to ultimately throw off the prophecies of God. So, all these prophecies, a lot of these, depend on Israel. And that's one of the reasons why Satan is always obsessed with trying to eliminate Israel, because if Satan can eliminate Israel, then these prophecies can't ever come true. And therefore the end can never come, and et cetera. So does Satan have any hope of his plans winning? No, but if you're going to lose anyway, you might as well go for broke, right? So I kind of think that's Satan's strategy, more or less. It's like, hey, what do we have to lose here? You know what I mean? We might as well do our best. So anyway, he makes a plan to devour the child, and we'll see here. So verse 5, she gave birth to a male child, one who's to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, Jesus. But her child was caught up to God and his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. Guess how many years that is? 3.5 years. Yeah, good guess. You got it. Good guess. So this the Great Tribulation is a place that Israel is going to flee to, where they will be protected. Now, I believe that is the city of Petra, or Basra, which is an underground city. It's ancient. It's kind of in the desert, more or less. If you've seen Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, they filmed at Basra or Petra for that movie. You can see it there. So, which is I think it's modern day Jordan, if I'm not mistaken. And Jordan is actually very friendly with Israel, kind of on the sly, but nonetheless. So let's talk about so. The question, we see this image of Satan being like cast down with the stars or the angels. I don't know if you ever considered when did Satan actually fall? Like, when did he commit a sin? When was he cast down exactly? Because this is what we in the book of Genesis. God creates Adam and Eve, okay, and then all the earth and the animals and the plants, all that stuff. And then like the next thing we see is Satan on the scene, and he tempts Eve, and we know the fall of man happens. So at some point before then, he fell, right? And it doesn't give us any sort of indication of when that happened. Furthermore, we also know that the Bible says that the angels were watching God as he created the earth. So in the creation narrative, there's no mention of the angels or any angelic beings being created. They're already there. And this leads to what we call the gap theory. If you're familiar with the gap theory, a lot of people try to make this about dinosaurs. It has nothing to do with dinosaurs. That's like you have to do some real mental gymnastics to make that work. But it basically stems from Genesis 1 and 1 and 2. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, this is the key, okay? That word for was, the earth was without form and void. The actual Hebrew is became. So it's the earth became without form and void. Furthermore, this is confirmed in another passage off the top of my head. I can't remember where it is exactly, but it talks about how what God says, when I made the earth, I did not make it form and void, okay? So there's like this gap up here where in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth became without form. So wait, the earth was made and something happened to it? This is where people start to wonder, is this the period of time where Satan more or less fell? And his fall might have led to the destruction of the earth as it was at that time, and God had to more or less recreate everything. It's somewhat speculative, but at the same time, it kind of aligns with some other things that we see in the scripture. It's not super important to know all the details about this, but worth at least considering and taking a look at, because it kind of gives us an indication of some of the timeline that's going on here as well. So coming back to Revelation 12, now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So the devil comes from the Greek, which means basically like slanderer. And Satan is a Hebrew word, basically means adversary, okay? So both describe Satan well. So here's the question. This is where people have some debate. Is this just a reiteration of what has already been said? Is this just kind of giving us more details about when Satan was originally cast out of heaven? Or is this something that happens after a later date? Now, I tend to be in the camp that thinks that this specific passage, the first one, talks about how, he swiped down his tails and a third of the stars fell. To me, that happens sometime around Genesis 1, okay? Sometime in that period, okay, where he originally falls. This, I believe, happens towards like either the beginning of the 70th week or in the middle of the, during the Great Tribulation. And we'll talk about why that is. So if you remember in the book of Job 1, we see this passage. We're not gonna get too deep, but we're just gonna talk about this here. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Sons of God comes from the phrase Benaiah Elohim. It means beings who are directly created by God. That's kind of the flavor. Usually it's referring to angels and angelic beings, okay? When we see the sons of God. And Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered to the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down it." So we're saying a glimpse here, but what we see here in Job, and it happens again in Job 2, as it turns out, there's this like period. I guess it's almost like they have to file a report. Even the fallen angels and even Satan himself have to appear before God and kind of give account of what they've been up to, essentially. This idea that there's like a war between God and Satan, like it's not really a war, okay? In a war, you don't know who's going to win. There's like a struggle, there's fight. There's no struggle between God and Satan, okay? Like Satan's on a leash, essentially. God doesn't sweat him, okay? So there's not, when you see like in Hollywood or whatever, like, oh, the forces of darkness fighting the forces of good. Like there is spiritual warfare, don't get me wrong. But like, God's not worried about his plans. He's got everything under control. And Satan's one of those things that he has under control. But all I'm kind of trying to point out here is the fact that there is a time in present day, it seems, where Satan has access to heaven to a certain degree, okay? And it seems like here in this chapter in Revelation, that is eliminated. Like there's something breaks out where Satan fights against Michael and his angels. Michael is the archangel. We see him appear a number of times in scripture. Usually pretty much every time he's fighting. So he's like a warrior angel, and it's usually in connection with Israel in some capacity. Okay, so he's like a warrior angel who fights on behalf of Israel, essentially. And anyway, once this breaks out, that's it. Like Satan is no longer, it seems to me that Satan is no longer given access to heaven. And we're going to see it in the next verses. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, where the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down. He accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. So this, again, this is clearly happening after, it seems, like Jesus has already committed, you know what I mean? He saved people from their sins. So that to me alone tells me that it's not referring to, this isn't the same, this isn't like a different account of the same event. Okay, these are two separate events. The first one was the original fall of Satan, and this one is where he's like permanently kicked out, never to return. And what is it? Like, it's possible that because he was accusing the brethren or something like that. I mean, you know, they're making this proclamation that that's what he was doing, and now he's been thrown down, and he's been conquered by the blood of the Lamb, you know, all this stuff. So, so to me, again, I think this is something that happens, you know, sometime during the 70th week of Daniel, maybe at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. And we see here in verse 12, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. So Satan realizes that, yeah, there's a specific, again, there's been a specific time frame allotted. And at the end of that time, it's over for him. He's going to be bound for 1,000 years, released, but then eventually, immediately after that, thrown into Gehenna. And he realizes that he doesn't have much time left. He's got to make the most of it. And the people who are alive on the earth are warned about it, because it's not going to be fun, as you can imagine. Satan is going to be given essentially what he's always wanted, the opportunity to kind of play God, essentially. And we're going to see it all. He's going to have his own little evil trinity between the Antichrist, the prophet, and himself. It's almost representing the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We're going to see that he's going to have a kingdom. We're going to see that he's going to have marks similar to the people who are marked by Jesus. You know, there's a lot of parallels, and it's all, you know, he's going to have his own Christ, the Antichrist, who, or again, to put it in better terms, the pseudo Christ might be a better way of putting it, false Christ. But he's going to have that time. God's going to let him basically do what he wants for a few years, and then it'll all come to an end. And it's also God's judgment that on mankind, that he's going to allow all of this. So
some people will be deceived.
A lot of people are going to be deceived.
They're
Oh
gonna
yeah.
think that it's Christ.
Yeah. They're going to think, there's going to be people who think that this is the actual Messiah. And there's probably just going to be people who think he's just the best thing ever. You know, maybe no messianic undertones to it. They're just like, nope, he's just the best, cult of personality sort of thing. Yeah, and everybody's going to fall for it. It says in the New Testament that it talks about the deception that's coming. There is something that the world has never seen before, and everybody's going to fall for it. Just about, not everybody, but just about everybody's going to fall for it. We'll talk a little bit more about what that might be in future sessions. I'm surprised we kind of ended a little early tonight. I think I had more questions with the teen group last time, so it's probably what slowed me down a little bit. But I don't want to get too into it, because we're going to cover that as we get into it.
Could you describe the 1,000 years? Like, will that be the people that come to Christ during the tribulation, and all the people that come to faith from the witnesses? Yeah,
so that's a good question. So in the 1,000-year period, and we'll kind of cover this more as we get to it, because this comes at the end of. Well, it's well, this is the thing. We don't really know. So we know that the 144,000 are going to make it through the Great Tribulation. Okay, so them for sure. They're Israelites. Okay, they for sure are going to make it. And it seems that a lot of these other nations, a lot of people are going to survive as well. And here's the thing: when like the end happens, like there's going to be no denying. Like Jesus himself is going to come riding on a horse with his armies and decimate the Antichrist and his armies. Like at that point, it's like there are no unbelievers anymore. You know what I mean? Like you see that, you're like, oh, I'm a believer. If you're a survivor, you're a believer at that point. Okay. So yeah. So in a certain sense, are there going to be like there will be believers. There are going to be some Israelites, and I think there's going to be some people who just manage to survive. There's going to be a lot of people who die in the Great Tribulation, a lot. But there's going to be people who live on, and they're going to be the people who populate the millennial reign, essentially. And they'll be scattered throughout the whole earth, I imagine. So that's kind of my interpretation. Now, there are people who are amillennial, who don't even believe in the millennium, even though the Bible clearly says that there's a 1,000-year period where Jesus reigned. So I don't know. You have to do a lot of, you have to take things very allegorically to kind of believe that, which I don't. I take the Bible for its word. Obviously, like, these are signs, like these are things that are kind of like they're encoded, and there's certain things that we're going to know, and there's certain things we're just not going to know until it actually happens. But you know, I take these things for kind of what they are, and you know, I try not to do as much allegorizing. Yeah.
That's when heaven on earth begins. Instead of
So
like
yeah,
all them coming up to heaven.
Well,
everybody
yeah.
in heaven
So
comes back down to earth.
So my idea, so one of the things that it says clearly is that the people who are killed in the Great Tribulation appear to be co-heirs with Christ, and they rule in the millennial reign. Okay. So my current understanding, and I could be wrong about this, and there are probably a lot of people who disagree with me. My understanding is this. I think that the church is actually going to be in heaven for the entire millennium. I think that we're going to be serving God in the temple of heaven. And the saints who are not the church, in my opinion, who are saved during the Great Tribulation, let's just call them tribulation saints, okay? I believe that they're going to be caught up at the end of the Great Tribulation by Jesus, and they're going to eventually come back and reign with Jesus over the millennium. Yes, yeah, that's kind of my position. Okay, again, I could be wrong. I could be totally wrong about this. Like, I kind of keep this belief with an open hand, and I'm like 85% sure. Maybe I don't really know. Nobody really knows for sure. So they reign for 1,000 years. Okay, and again, the people who survive the Great Tribulation, they will continue on in the millennium. Okay, then after 1,000 years, Satan's let loose again. He deceives the nations again rebel against God, and then that's it. Jesus is like, it's over, we're done. And it talks about how there's the white throne of judgment. The people who are in Hades are judged. The people who are saints are taken up to the new heavens and the new earth. There's going to be a whole new creation. God, 2 Peter, I think it's 2 Peter, he talks about how the first judgment was by water, the flood. The next one's going to be by fire. And everything's going to get just vaporized, and God's going to start over again. And this kind of also goes back to the idea of the gap theory as well. Like, creation getting vaporized or wiped out, and then he creates again. Like, it's nothing that kind of gives me credence to that theory, because it's like, well, that makes sense because that's part of the plan in the future. So maybe it already happened once before as well. I mean, who knows? You know what I mean? Like, this is one of the weird things you got to understand is like, so God is outside of dimensionality. He's outside of our universe entirely. And you wonder, like, well, what's out there? You know what I mean? Like, what's out? Does God have other universes that he's created? Like, there's this concept of the multiverse that people, usually people come up with it. They propose it because they want a theory that allows them to not believe in God. But, like if you don't have infinite amount of universes, like what we see, like evolution makes no sense. You know what I mean? Like, or, the idea that life can come out of nothing. We've already talked about it. It makes no sense. So you need something infinite. Well, an infinite series of universes, and hey, we're lucky we got in one of the ones that has life. Yay! You know what I mean? Like, so that's how usually people try to justify the multiverse theory. There's no evidence for it. Go ahead. What? Well, I'll tell you what. One of the interesting things is that it talks about how Jerusalem comes down like a bride adorned for her wedding, essentially. And I think that this is when the church, essentially, because what's the church referred to as? The bride of Christ, okay? And Jerusalem is not just a place, it's a people, It's like, I hate to borrow something from Marvel, but, if you've seen Thor Ragnarok, they say, Asgard is not a place, it's a people. Similar sort of idea with the idea of Jerusalem and the people. But it says that the New Jerusalem is like a giant cube. And if you were to put it on the modern day world, it would be like basically about the size of Australia, something like that. That's one city. And it says it's a cube. So imagine a cube the size of Australia that also goes up the size of Australia, essentially. Like, it's huge. If you put it on a modern day globe, it doesn't make any sense. So I think the next Earth is going to be significantly larger than the one that we have today. My opinion, whatever, I could be wrong. We'll find out one day or another, but I think that's going to be one of the main differences between this Earth and the next one. I think it's going to be huge. I think it's going to be gigantic. There's a lot of people that have been saved over the years, and we don't want to be crammed. So I got my mansion, so I want to need some space, for sure. Yeah, so that's all kind of speculative. We'll find out. Are you leaving us, Mara? All right, let's pray.
I'm going to do the car shuffle. Thank you.
We're pretty much done here. Let's pray and we'll call it a night. Okay.
All right.
Lord, thank you again for your word, and we do our best to try to discern what you are trying to tell us in your these prophecies, Lord. But we pray that you make it clear to us in due time, and that our lives would be yielded to you, Lord. That you can use us in these troubled times that we live in, and before your. And so we love you. Thank you. Praise in Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you. See ya.
See ya. Have a good rest of the night.